My name is Allison Gonzalez. I am a Microsoft certified trainer here at Pragmatic Works. And recently we did an Excel Learn with the Nerds full 1.5 hour session. And in that we worked through a lot of really great things in Excel, and we ended it off with some dashboard ideas. Showed an example of what you could achieve with the data that we had just cleaned up. Well, due to popular demand, we're gonna walk through the build of that dashboard start to finish. So you can see every little step that I took. And if you wanna take some notes, get that file, anything like that, you can follow along. First off, before you do that, go watch the full Learn with the Nerds if you haven't already. I will have that linked below, so you can easily just click, hop over there, watch that, and then come back here for this final part of building out this dashboard together. On the Learn with the Nerds video, you are going to see the full video, the full walkthrough of everything, and you're gonna have the class files linked there. So if you wanna follow along with this dashboard build, you can hop on over there, watch that video, and grab the files to follow along with. If you already did, welcome on back. Let's get started. Let's get into this dashboard build. All right, here is the dashboard that we showed at the end of our Learn with the Nerds session. So we can see it's all based on this candle data. We've got 2 years of data. So I have all these great slicers built in over here where we can sort our data based on kind of the category of candle that we're selling. We can see, some of these visuals and things react and change. I can also go off to the specific year that things are selling and even down to the specific month and see all of that data. So working with a dashboard, showing this data makes it really easy for your end user to interact with the data and see how things are moving. So we've also got some good metrics up here of how much we made last year, how much we made this year, our total sales, and just a count of the amount of candles that we have sold. Now we can see things will adjust with this. So if I sort it down to a particular category, like just natural candle, you can see I've got just beeswax. It's the only candle in that category. I can see how much we made last year versus this year and our total sales for that category and candles sold. Now I also notice over here, I don't have my map reacting and I don't have this table reacting. So when you're working on a dashboard, you can decide to set it up with having all of the things adjust to it. Some things, unfortunately, like a map, will not work with a pivot. So you have to copy the data out and then use that data to create the map. So that map does end up being static. You can go back through, adjust that data later on, but at this point in time, you can't have a map coming from a pivot table. I also just copied out the data to have this particular table shown in the dashboard to be able to put the conditional formatting on it. Well, let's clear that slicer. And we're not going to walk through the exact process that we took to build this. So assuming you are starting with the data, that you have that file to work from, either you followed through Learn with the Nerds last week, or you went through and just started adjusting it now, let's go ahead and open up that blank file to work through. And this is going to be kind of our guide of what we'll be building. All right, so I have my data and I have it in a pivot table. Remember, we took our data into Power Query, we cleaned it up, and we brought it back. We did a close and load to, and in your close and load to, you can choose to load it to a pivot table. You can always go back to your queries and connection to change your load if you loaded it to a table or a different spot. But here in my pivot table, I have the product in my rows, I have the quantity in my value, so I'm getting a sum of the quantity. I have my total sales also in my values, and then I have the year in my columns. So I can see this resulting pivot table is giving me each of the candles. I can see their sales in 2022, 2023, and I have these total numbers right here. I can also see the quantity, so the number of candles that I've sold for each of those, as well as their totals down here. I can see total sum, so all of the total amount of money I've gotten from candles and the total quantity here. So putting that into my pivot table has generated these total amounts for me, essentially also the particular year amounts as well. Now, before you ever take your data, put it into a bunch of visuals on a page and call it a dashboard, you need to think through your structure. You need to think through how are people going to look at this data, move through the report, and what do they need to see, and how can I lay it out in the best possible way. So I always will work off of a wireframe. I'll whiteboard this. Generally, you can, even just use a piece of paper to kind of knock out what you want and where you want to have it, how big, how wide, how long, how many rows, columns, etc. you want to include in here. And do it on a piece of paper, get a rough idea. You can also do it in a PowerPoint, just move some boxes around. And then kind of once you have an idea, I always like to put it into a cell. Now, I do this very easily. You just kind of highlight over what you want, and then I just use this outside border around the areas and kind of roughly put in where I want it to go. I always have my grid line on for this so I can make sure everything is lined up and even. And then just in a cell kind of in the middle area, I will just put what I want to be in that space. I even use some simple lines. And of course, in your insert shapes, just a simple line right there. That is going to be a nice kind of divider for your different sections. Now, when you are looking and thinking through how should you arrange the data, always think through what is my end user's natural behavior. What are they already conditioned to do when they are interacting with information? Well, for most people, they are conditioned to look at things starting in the top left. So top left is going to be kind of your place of prominence. That's generally where we're going to see some kind of logo or report or dashboard name showing up right there. If you think through websites, how you're looking at a website, that logo is always in that top leftmost location. So we want to lean into how people are looking at their data rather than try to reinvent the wheel and stick the logo in the bottom right corner, so to speak. So when we're also thinking through navigation, so anything controlling the actions of the data, like a slicer, putting in a slicer, of course, is going to filter my data. I want to see that either on the far left side or along the top, or potentially both if you have different types of slicers. So along the top of your report is a good spot for them, along with that left spot. For this report, I decided to put all of the slicers below my logo on the left. For my design, I'm also going to put kind of a box around them because I want them to stand out. I wanted to show, hey, this isn't really part of the data, but this is kind of your navigation to control what's happening on the page. On the top of my report now, I put some easy to read and ID items. This is generally where you'd want to see card type elements. So simple, easy to view metrics go here. Always think again, as you're looking at your report, people are going to be reading through this way and then kind of just moving through the report in this type of fashion. So when you go, what is something easy to read that's important that can go around the top? You'll then generally have your most important visuals next, and then your least important kind of information would go towards the bottom right. So kind of stacking it up at the top, what's going to first catch their eye to down to the bottom. So for mine, I'm going to have the more engaging visuals on the left, and then I'll have the table of information if they really want to dive in and look at that down at the right where they can dig into it. So we have our setup. We know where we want to put the content. I know what I want to see. I've kind of broken it down and being like, all right, I know I want to see last year's sales, this year's sales, my total sales. I just want to see, hey, how many candles have I sold altogether? And I know based on my slicers that will filter down each of these items. So breaking down and thinking through what you want to see before you ever make a chart, put it onto the page, will really help streamline your process and speed things up for your build. So with this kind of wireframe, I'm going to duplicate this sheet, so that way I can then just have this as my blueprint, as my guide to make a new one. So we are going to get a duplicate of this one. We'll move it to the end and create a copy. And this one I'm going to just name dashboard. So now I know I'm on my dashboard, and we want to be thinking back to front. So as I'm building this, what is the furthest back element? You really want to think in layers. So you're really, if you think through PowerPoint, how are you kind of stacking elements on top of each other? So I know that for everything, I want to have a far background color. I want all of the background cells to be one color. Then I want my actual dashboard background to be a different color. And then I'm going to have cells on top of that that will, again, also be a different color. So thinking back to front, we're going to work in that fashion. So I'm going to have all of my cells selected. On my home ribbon, I'm going to go into my paint bucket, and I'm going to choose the background color that I want to be in the far, far back. So I'm going to choose this dark, dark blue, and that is, you can see, is everything all the way over. We've got, this color is now the reigning background color. For my actual dashboard size, I want to choose a slightly lighter color. So I'm going to go through, choose the area that I want to be for my dashboard. Of course, yours can be longer, wider, really depends on your end screen size where you're going to be looking at this, how much info you want to display. And I'm going to make this a slightly lighter color. Again, just working my way through. So I can see I have one color for all of the rest of the space, and then the area that's going to be around my dashboard is a little bit lighter. Next up, I have my lines here, and I'm going to make my lines an even lighter color. So now that they're on a dark background, I want them to stand out. So with my line selected, I'm going to come over to shape formatting, and I can see right now my shape outline is blue. I'm just going to go ahead and change that to white. I also want to give this a bit of depth, so I'm going to go to my shape effects, and I'm going to give it a shadow, and I'm just going to give it a simple outer shadow, that first outer option. So now it kind of stands off a little bit more, gives a little bit of depth and some movement. I know I have another one over here, so instead of going through the same exact steps to get it looking the exact same way, we're going to use our little handy format painter. Format painter is a great time saver anytime you have particular formatting on one thing and you want something else of the same type to look just like it. So with my first line selected, I'm going to click on my format painter. I'm going to hover right over my other line and select that. And you can see it immediately pasted in that exact same look and feel. So if you have to go through 10, 15 steps to change the look and feel of something, don't do that every single time. Copy that formatting over. So I have my background elements in, and again, we're working back to front. So next up, I want to put in a box. Essentially, I'm going to put in a rectangle that is going to be the background area for these items, my logo, my slicer over here, because I don't want them just looking like other visuals on the page. So for this one, we're just going to go back to our Insert tab. Spoiler, we're going to be in our Insert tab a lot today. That's really where we're grabbing all of the elements that we're going to need for this dashboard. If you wanted extra lines, extra things like that, again, those would just be right here in your shapes, and you can grab any other elements you want. Now, I want this rectangle. I'm going to grab that, and it's going to let me choose the size, and I'm just going to eyeball this. I kind of want this to go right around this, give this some even margin space for all of these elements here. And we can see that is now the top layer. So when you're working on elements, you can see right here in my shape format, I have a arrange section. In here in arrange, I can bring things forward, send things backward, and even see my selection pane, see that order. So if something is on top of it and I want it behind, I can move that around. Now for this shape, I want to have a gradient on there. I want a little bit of movement on here. I also, again, want a little bit of a drop shadow, and I can decide if I want to or not get rid of the border. So for this one, I'm going to easily be able to go through to my shape fill tab. And here on my shape fill tab, this is where you're going to be able to put in a gradient. So I can see I've got a gradient option right here, and I have all of the different options. And as I hover through these, I can see how those would actually look on my shape right here. Now, I can go ahead and select any of these. I want it to just be light on the top and dark at the bottom, which I think this is it, but kind of reversed here. I don't really want it on an angle, so you can play with the ones you want to get. I'm going to select this linear down one, but I want to make some modifications. So back in my shape fill dropdown, in that gradient dropdown, all the way at the bottom, there is a more gradients option. So I'm going to click on that more gradients, and I'm going to get a nice right pop out where over here in my gradient stops, this is where you get to choose the color that's going to be in each one of those. So I can go through and adjust these each. I can add in additional gradient stops or even remove ones if I don't feel like I need that midpoint. All right, we are going to modify our gradient stop. So for my first color, this is going to be white because I have a white background on my logo, and so I want it to blend in and not look just like I have a white square there. So I'm going to add a white gradient to the top one. I am then going to put in a second stop here, and when you click on it, you can click to select your stop. Once you have it selected, I can see I have an orange little rectangle around there. Then you click on your color. Once I have the color clicked on, then I can choose what I want that middle color to be. So I've got these three in place, and I'm going to leave it like this until I get my logo in, and then I'm going to modify this just a bit to get it to fit perfectly. So once I have those in, I'm going to close this out. And the other thing that I want to add on here is a drop shadow. So with my shape selected, I can go to Shape Effects, go to a shadow, and then select the shadow that I want to add on. So now I have my shape sitting on here looking great. I'm going to make another change to this. The other element that I want to adjust here in my shape formatting is I'm going to get rid of the outline. So right now there has like a black outline to it, and I'm going to go with no outline. That way for this, I just don't like the look of it. You can also play around with the width. Maybe you want a darker outline on here, you can play around with that. Now that I have the location for my slicers and my visual, I'm going to go ahead and bring that logo image in. And to bring in an image, again, you're going to go into your insert ribbon. Again, we're going to our insert ribbon for everything. I'm going to go with picture, and then when I place in an image, generally, most times, I like to go with over cells. That way it is not tied into the size of the cell and I can move it around. There's definitely times when it makes sense to have an image linked into a cell, but for things like this, I like to place it over the cells so that way it's not constrained to the boundaries of that cell. So when you hit place over cells, you can decide where to go, this device, mobile, stock, online, etc. And then if you have it, I have it saved, you just navigate on your computer to where that image is located. Once you hit insert, then you can move your image over to the exact location you would like it to be. So So I'm going to resize this to fit right there at the top. You can always, because again, I remember I resized this so I can move my shape out of the way to get that exact size I want to have. So I'm going to kind of rearrange that so that way it fits right where I want it. And I can then move my background area back in place. Now notice we still have, I adjusted my gradient to be white at the top so that way it didn't look like I had this silly white box sitting here. But because I have that, I'm going to adjust my gradient so that way it doesn't look silly. So back over to our shape formatting for our rectangle. Again, I have that rectangle selected. I'm going to go back into the shape fill, go to my gradient, go to the more gradients to pop that gradient pane back up. And I'm going to add in an additional gradient stop. Bloop, and I'm going to make this one white. So with the additional one added in, I'm just going to pull this gradient stop down just until, and you can see over on the left in the shape as that moves down, then it starts to make that logo look a lot more integrated in. So I'm going to move that down just until that looks natural, like it right there. And I can close that format pane back up. Alrighty. These are really all of the background elements I want to put in. Let's get into adding in our data. So first off, I'm going to go with my slicers. I'm going to have 3 slicers that I'm going to be able to use to filter my data. All of those are going to come from the pivot table. So we're headed back over to our candle table sheet. And when I have my pivot table up and selected, I am going to, in my pivot table analyze area, be able to insert slicers. So I'm over here on my candle table page, on that pivot table analyze tab, and right here I've got some slicers and I'm going to click into there. So now the slicer shows me all of the pivot table fields that I have available to me that I will be able to use. So I want to have a slicer for category. So I'm going to click on category and hit OK. It's going to add it over here to this page. I'm just going to move it out of the way, click back into my pivot table, and repeat this process 2 more times to be able to get the year slicer that I would also like. And finally, we also want the month. All right, so I now have 3 slicers, and I am just going to hold Shift to select all 3 of them, do a Control X to cut, and then go over to my dashboard and do a Control V to paste them in. All right, so we've got all 3 of those. I'm going to move them off to the side. I'm going to slide my shape out of the way, and then I'm just going to take my little slicers and I'm going to stick them right where I already decided they should go. So we're going to get our category in place. Then I'm going to move my year in place and just resize to fit where I think it should go. And finally, I'm going to drop in that month slicer to fit that in place as well. So now with all of my slicers in place, I can just slide that image back on in, that shape rather, to fit everything in. Make sure we're centered in that space, looking good. All right, our left area is now complete. My slicers are in here. Of course, I don't have any data to work with, but we are going to be pulling again all of our data from it's going to originate from this pivot table, from this cleaned up data. So first off, we are going to put in the cards around the top. Now I already decided I wanted to see last year's sales. I wanted to see this year's sales. Of course, we're slightly into 2024, so this is our previous year's sales, but we'll just say last year, this year. I want to see my total sales and also the quantity. So by arranging my pivot table in this way, including these items, I have these items already set for me in the pivot table, and I can just easily get them and use them. So that's what we're going to tackle. Next is these 4 areas right up here. So what I want to do for these is work on my formatting. Now, sometimes you can use a card and connect the value to the card. Sometimes that gets a little finicky, it doesn't work. I personally like to just put it to the cell, and you can easily format the background of your cell to look like it is, again, a shape, just like we had over here. So for this, right now, this is 3 columns and like 5 or 6 rows. I'm going to highlight all of them that I want, and I'm going to hit merge and center. You'll always get a little alert that, hey, if there's text, it's only going to keep, 1 value in there. We're just going to hit OK, and we can see as it goes through, it merges all of them, and we just have 1 left. Yep, merge and center, and final 1. All right, next step into making this look a little bit more special is we are going to change the formatting for this cell. With the cell selected, which we can see we click through, it's just a 1. We can go to cell styles. Now I have this one pre-done, but I'm gonna walk you through how I did that. So it's very simple. All you have to do is click on new cell style, and then there's going to be a window that pops up where you're able to control that. If you want to work off, if you have one that you've done previously and you want to modify it, all you have to do is click on that style in your custom and then hit modify. And the same window pops up that shows when you hit a new one. So you'll name your style, and then you want to go to format. This is the key here. This is where we get to do great stuff. So in my fill section, this is where I'm going to choose what to do. So for mine, I wanted a gradient. So I went to fill effects, and here in my fill effects, look what we get. We've got a gradient. So I can set my gradient to kind of match what I have going on over here for my navigation area with my slicers. So for my gradient effect, I just chose a color 1, which was my lighter shade, and color 2, which was a little bit darker of a shade. You of course can also mix up your styling. So if I wanted vertical or an angle, a corner, you can change that. But I'm just gonna again match my light to dark, top to bottom. And you would hit OK on here if you made any changes or to save that. And then again, once you have that done, you're able to hit OK. There's other things also you can modify in here. So if I did not want to have a border, I could change that. If I wanted to set my font stylings in here, I can also do that right here. So that way everything is set exactly the way I want it to in this cell. So any changes you make, you would then hit OK for that to work. And then again, you're still in this window. We adjust our formatting. You can change any of your styles here, and finally OK. So once you have that modified with that cell selected, you can go to your cell styles. You'll see your new style saved here, and you can click for that to change it. You can see I also had the text styling, so that did it as well. I'm gonna do 1, and then I'm gonna add in my next element, which is the number. So what I actually want to see over here is, it's saying text box, and I don't want it to say last year's sales. What I want to see over here is coming from my candle table. I want to actually display the number. So up in my formula bar, I'm gonna get rid of this. And I'm going to start off with an equal sign. And then I'm just going to click over to my candle table, and then I'm going to click on the cell that has the data that I want. I want last year's sales, which is this total right here. So with this cell selected, and you can see it is pulling from the pivoted data, exactly is pulling 2022 sales. And I'm just going to hit this check mark here. If you go to another sheet to grab information, you want to make sure you're hitting this check mark, hitting that OK mark before you go back to your other sheet, or it's going to not work. So we're gonna hit that enter mark and boom, there we go. We get our data. Now, this is a little bit hard to read here. It's a little bit dark. It's kind of right on the borderline of whether I'd wanna change it. So I'm gonna adjust this to be white. And I think that legibility works a little bit better. I do wanna have a title, but I already have this number showing up. I can't have the title last year's sales plus the number in the same cell. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go back to that insert ribbon. I told you we're living here, and we are going to get a text box. So here in your text tab, I'm on a smaller screen, so mine is all kind of compacted down. I'm going to select text box. And then I can see I have this little symbol on my mouse. Now, I don't like to click into the cell where I'm writing it. I want to click kind of over here in some blank space so I have some more space to work with and I can really make this text box whatever size I want. So I'm going to type in last year's sales. And we are gonna now move this over to where we want it to show up. And I can get this to line up exactly on the top corner. And I'm gonna also make this fit exactly to the cell. Now that it's in place sized, let's get that formatted. We're gonna center it. We're gonna make that a little bit bigger. That's a little too big, so we'll go smaller so it fits. We'll also go bold, and I'm gonna make this, let's go with a darker blue so it stands out against the white text. And I'm also gonna make sure that moves down so we have everything lined up. So now that I have these two elements completed, I want it to look identical for the other three. So now I'm gonna go with this selected, go to Format Painter, click to the next one, select your Format Painter, click to the next one, select your Format Painter, click to the next one. So now all three are matching that first one. I'm then going to get the text box and do a Control-C to copy and then a Control-V to paste. And we'll just do that Control-C, Control-V each time to move these over, and then we can go back and kind of make those exactly fit where they need to go. So you use your arrows to kind of move those around as needed. That one's pretty good. This one can go up a little bit more to adjust. So let's adjust our titles. This one is this year. This year's sales. This one is total sales, and then this one is candles sold. Another thing I do want to adjust with this is that this right now is set to be currency because my first one is currency, but this number is just going to be a flat number, so I just want that to be a number instead of currency. So let's go through and grab our data from our pivot table. We're going to get rid of our text box data. We're going to start with that equal sign, and I am going to go back to my candle table. I'm going to select this year's sales, which for me is C14, hit that check mark, and boom, we've got that data, and it's going to adjust as our sales do as well. And for total sales, get that equal sign in, go back to our pivot table, and here is my total sales. For me, that's F14. Hit our check mark. And then final one is the quantity of sales or the quantity of candles that we've sold. So equal sign, go to that table, and then we'll grab that. Final check mark, and there we go. We've got the count. I do not want to have any decimal places here. I just want to show the number so you can play with your arrows in that number formatting to get that right. All right, last three pieces that we need to put in place. First off is a chart. Let's head back over to our pivot table to get that. So we have our pivot table up, and in our pivot table analyze tab, I can see all of these elements. This is where I can grab the slicer from, and this is also where I can get a chart. So this pivot chart is tied to the data that is shown in the pivot table. So I can hit pivot chart. I can decide what one I want, column chart, line, pie chart, bar chart, area. You can see based on the data that you have, which one would work best, which one's going to show what you need in here. I'm gonna stick with, let's go with a bar chart here because I have a lot of different elements, so I think that's gonna show better in a bar chart. And I can see whether I want a clustered, a stacked, 100%. I can also go with a 3D, not really a fan of 3Ds, so I'm just gonna stick with a clustered bar chart. And we're gonna hit OK. Now with this, you have a lot of control over the look and feel of what you want to show by going right here to, first off, this plus sign. Your plus sign lets you choose your elements. So I could turn the axis layers off. I could have the axis titles in if I wanted to. I could add in a chart title. I could put data labels on there. I could have a data table shown in here. I could have error bars. I can show my grid lines. I'm gonna turn mine off. And I can also have a legend, and I'm gonna turn that off as well. So you can decide what elements you want to show. Next, for our visual, I'm gonna go to my little paintbrush icon. And now for my paintbrush icon, I can choose color, and I'm gonna go with monochromatic, and I'm gonna choose one that matches what I've done here. And that is looking very good, and I have the elements on here. Now I don't want to also have this product drop down here. I don't want to see that, and I also don't want these sum elements on here. So I can go to either remove the field, I can go to hide these access field buttons on the chart, and I hide all field buttons on the chart. And that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna hide all field buttons on the chart. So now I just have the elements on the chart I want. So I'm going to hit a Control X to copy, and we're gonna go back to our dashboard, and we're gonna do a Control V. Then we can just move this right into place where we want to go, and we'll just resize that to fit, get that all lined in as we want to. And now you can test it out by clicking on those slicers, and we're going to see stuff will adjust as we click on different elements here because all of the data is coming from the same place. We can of course hit that clear slicer icon to clear that information out and get it back to all states. So all of this data that is on here is connected. The last two elements are not connected, but we will pull it from essentially that same candle table data. All right, for the top part, I want to have a map. Now if I try to generate a map from here in my pivot table, go to that pivot chart, look, we can see it's not going to allow a map because I can't create this inside of a pivot table. So what I need to do is use the data outside of the pivot table. So what you're able to do is get the data that you would like. So in this case, I would like the state, and I would like the total sales. So I have the sum of total sales and the state, and then I can easily select all of this. And you can use your key codes for this too, but I'm going to do a Control C, and I'm just going to paste this off to the side as just regular data over here. But I am going to go Control T, and that makes it a table. For my pivot table though, I can rearrange this back to how I want it because you can see based on what is showing up in the pivot table, your dashboard is going to adjust your data. So we need to make sure that at the end of this, our pivot table is showing the data that we need in a certain fashion. So I know I need to have the product back, I need to have my quantity back, I need to have the category back, and I also need to have the year. So put that year into my columns. So now it looks a little bit different than it was before, but because we have all of the elements, my numbers are all still showing up correctly. But of course this chart looks different. But as you adjust your pivot table, you can see you can get the chart looking the way you would like it. So we can maneuver this around as needed to adjust that. But now that I have this data pulled into its own separate location, I am going to make this the data for my map. So on my insert tab, now that it's not a pivot table, I can go and select map. And I can see that this is creating a map for me with the different elements. It is pulling the states and it is pulling the sum of sales into this visual for me. I can see exactly what state, and I can decide map stylings on here. I can go to change the colors. I'm going to go with monochromatic as much as I need. And when I'm happy with it, again, I can do that Control X, go back over to my dashboard and paste that in place. And I'm just going to move that right up over here to right where I want it to be. All right, final element is our table. And our table we're actually going to build right in here in these cells. So I'm going to, first off, make all of these cells white so they match the background of my other visuals. I'm going to get rid of the word table. And then I'm going to be putting in a list that has the candle, the years, and then I want to see growth for these. So back to our pivot table page, our candle table. What I want to lay this out is I want to see the product with the years. So I'm going to get rid of the quantity and I'm going to get rid of the category because I just want to have the candles and then how much we've made for each of the years plus the title on that. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to copy all of this. Control C to copy over to our dashboard, and I'm going to choose kind of where I want this to appear, and we're going to paste this in, but I want to paste it without any of the formatting. And here we are. So I want to make my first column larger, but I don't want to adjust the size of the rest of the thing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take the rest of this data. I'm going to do a Control X and a Control V to paste that one row over. Now, what I want is I want this one row to take up both of these. So we can go through and we can merge to make that one cell larger. So even though this is not over both those cells, it is going to look like it is. But I'm going to do a merge and center for this top title here. Change this from row labels to just candle. And then I'm going to change the color of everything else over here to fit my color palette. So we can go with a alternating blues for these, so it makes it a little easy to see. So I'll do those two as one blue and these other two as this blue. I'm going to make my top this slightly darker blue. We're going to make all of the text on this one larger, and we'll go bold. And for candle, I'm gonna left align that. I'm going to change this growth or this grand total one, and I'm actually going to change this to growth because I don't want to see the total here. I just want to go with, you know, how much have I made, or for each of these, more this year than last year. So we're going to have growth in this column instead. For this bottom, let's go with a dark for our total. And we'll change our text to white so we can actually read it, and make that also larger and bold. All right, we do also want to change all of the currency to currency. And then finally for growth, I'm going to go ahead and delete all of the values out of here, and we're going to just create a quick growth metric. So for this, I just want to see how much I've made in addition over here. So what I'm going to write here in my formula bar, we're going to start with an equal sign, and I'm going to put in parentheses because, of course, with our mathematical equations, we want this happening first. I am going to have T33, which is this year's sales, and then I'm going to have minus last year's sales. I'm going to put that in parentheses. I'm also going to lock both of these columns down. So you can hit F4 to do that, or you could just stick the $ in front of the column letter. Both of those options work. I'm going to then put a /n to divide this part of my equation by what I made in 2022. Now that I have this one, and of course we also have to lock this down with that $ too. Now that I have this in, we can see the growth, and we want to, of course, format this as a percentage. And we are going to pull this down. So I can see I've got 9% growth for some, gone in the opposite direction for others. And so we can see how we're doing in that growth. Now, final thing I want to do for this is go through and put in some conditional formatting. So with my growth column selected, and I'm also going to drag this down all the way to the bottom, so that way we have our other area also giving that. And let's copy our formatting and paste that over here. There we go. And change that to percentage. All right. So we've got our growth column selected. Now what I want to see is I want to see this conditional formatting, but I also want to see the numbers as well. I want to see the conditional formatting next to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the metric. I'm going to paste it in so that way I can see I'm still pulling from the right selection, but I'm going to do my conditional formatting here. And I'm going to click with that column selected. I'm going to go down to, and I can see I have data bars, color scales, or icon sets. I'm going to choose these arrows. And of course, there's lots of options. You could have lots of shapes here. I'm going to go with the very first one. And now I can also decide, hey, do I want to have just the number showing, just the shape? So in your conditional formatting, I'm going to go in to where I was at with those icon sets and modify that. And so I can decide if I want to have the icons showing up in that same cell or put them in a separate one. I'm going to select show icon only and hit OK. So now they're showing up. Let's give this a white background. And boom, we have our dashboard set up. These guys get a white background as well. And we are good to go. So we can change that style depending on what we want to see, check marks, shapes. But now I can see if I click through on here, we have this first chart is changing, but not the other two. Because with these other two, and I'm going to get rid of that chart title, with these other two, we have kind of essentially taken that data from another location to put that in here. Now, if I want to get my candle sold metric back, I can go back to our candle table. and rearrange our pivot table to get that showing exactly the way that I want it to be. And of course, I want to get in my quantity, in my values. So I've got my values, I've got my year, I've got my product, all in here, ready to go. So product, quantity, total sales. We've also got the year, and then we can see over in our dashboard, boom, everyone is laid out and looking exactly the way we would like. So that is how we were able to set up this dashboard. Hopefully you were able to take lots of helpful little tips and tricks with building your own dashboards in Excel. I'm Allison Gonzalez. Hopefully you found this super helpful, and I will see you back here for another Excel video. We got so many fantastic questions in that last Learn with the Nerd section that I'm gonna make an Excel videos all year long to answer your questions. So make sure you like this video and subscribe so all of the rest of the videos will pop up for you the rest of the year. And I will see you back then.